All right, thank you all for joining us this afternoon while we're over our lunch breaks here. Hi, my name is Kyle Dump. I'm a creative communications specialist for Lincoln Electric System, and welcome to the first webinar for LES's 2021 Sustainable Living Week. This webinar is the Journey to Net Zero, Past, Present, and Future Considerations, presented by LES's own Scott Benson. Let's see here. Just a few things before we get started. Today's webinar is being recorded. You should have gotten a notification of that when you jumped in here, but in case you didn't, now you know. And we're recording it because we'll have a replay that'll be available by tomorrow up on our website for Sustainable Living Week, les.com/go-green. So if you miss out part of this today, or you've got a friend who wish they could have checked it out, just head on over to les.com/go-green and you should find it there. Let's see here. You should all be in listen/view only mode to hopefully prevent any issues if you suddenly start talking, I guess. Is anyone not in view only mode? I'm going to take that as a no. Perfect. So after Scott's presentation, we've also left some room for a Q&A session. You should notice a little button. Let's see here if I can show it to you. You'll see here a little button for the Q&A down at the bottom. You can type your questions into the Q&A area, or if you'd prefer, you can also raise your hand, and we will call on you that way. As I mentioned at the top, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on les.com/go-green. Along with tons of other great content we've been putting together to celebrate sustainability this week. And please don't forget, this Saturday is LES's first ever EV Ride and Drive. That'll be from 10 to 3 at Haymarket Park. I think that's all my preamble, Scott. So without further ado, I present to you our presenter, Scott Benson, Manager of Transmission and Planning. And over to you, Scott.
All right. Thank you, Kyle. Let's go ahead and get the screen share up, because if we get that, we're home free. All right. I think we're in business now.
Great.
Does it look good?
I muted myself. Looks good to me, Scott. You're ready to go.
Okay. Good. You were making me panic there that I wasn't ready to go. All right. Well, thanks for everybody for attending. We're going to talk today about LES's new decarbonization goal to reach net zero CO2 emissions. And when we look at that, we're going to talk about what LES has done in the past, how that has kind of formed our position currently, and then some considerations we have to have as we look towards completing that goal in the future. Now, just to get everybody level set as to what we're talking about here, this is an excerpt right from LES's Administrative Board resolution from November of 2020, so just the end of last year, adopting that goal. And that goal is specifically for LES to achieve net zero carbon dioxide production from our entire generation portfolio by the year 2040. The key there being really net zero. Net zero means that we've got to get close to zero CO2 production, but maybe not all the way there. So let's say that we can only get down to a 97 or a 98% reduction. We still got a little bit of CO2 coming from one or two resources. Well, because it's a net zero goal, that allows LES staff to go out and do some things to offset those other CO2 emissions. A great example is like by planting trees. So we could plant some trees. They're going to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere and offset those remaining emissions. So as long as we net out to zero by 2040, we're good. I will tell you right now, that is one of the more aggressive decarbonization goals in the country. And so we've got our work cut out for us. And when the LES Administrative Board set that goal, they also recognize that there's a lot of different things that you have to balance and keep measured by when you're pursuing this goal. And they've got the list there. And what it really boils down to is that in the end, the path and the pace to which we attain the goal is going to be balanced by things like making sure that we maintain high electric system reliability. When people flip the light switch, they want the lights to go on. And we've also got to make sure that we always have a focus on environmental stewardship. And people say, well, why is that? It's a CO2 goal. Of course you have a focus on environmental stewardship. And that's true, but that's only a part of it. There's a lot of different things that go into any kind of technology. and being a good steward of the environment. Things like recycling wind turbine blades, or what do you do with old batteries from energy storage? So we always got to have an eye out for those kinds of things as well. Now, obviously, one of our main components is to always try to maintain the lowest rates around. And so we've got to make sure we're focused on keeping those rates low for especially our low and fixed income customers. And then obviously we've got contracts for a lot of these generation units already. So just because you set a new goal, that doesn't mean your contract goes away. So we've got to work on navigating those, and that's going to definitely play into the timeline. And then finally, and we're going to talk more about this throughout today, we're going to need some advancements in technology because you just don't have all the tools you need today to do this. We're talking about new or improved generation, energy storage, we already mentioned. Maybe it's carbon capture where you're still producing CO2, but you're going to capture it and put it somewhere, sequester it so it doesn't make its way to the atmosphere. Or any other emerging solutions that we haven't even thought of yet, but are going to play a big role in LES achieving this goal going forward. So that's the goal that we've got in front of us. Like I said, it was just set in November of 2020, but you can get a really great feel for how we're currently positioned if you wind the clock back and look at some of the things we've done in the past, because all of that has put us in a good position to pursue this goal today. And so the first thing we're going to do is kind of walk that backward and look at some of those things in the past and how they form our present position. And when we do that, we're going to ask you a lot of questions along the way, keep you on your toes. And this is our first polling question. This is a picture of LES's first solar home. And so we're going to ask you, in what year do you think LES built that first solar home? 1976, 1986, 1996, or 2006? So please take a moment and go ahead and put your guess in there. Some of you may have seen this before, but I'm guessing a lot of you haven't.
Just give it another couple of seconds. All right, here we go.
Okay, so the winner by a slim margin, 1986, followed by 1976. Okay, nobody bid on 2006, very good. Just a few on 96. So I will tell you the answer there, 1976 is actually when that went in. Kind of amazing. This won't be the last one that you think, wow, that's a long time ago that LES was doing things like that. To say, okay, we put our first solar home in 1976. Well, how is that translated to today? It's really set the groundwork for a lot of different solar programs. And you start off somewhere kind of simple, things like paperless billing. That's where you can sign up on your LES bill to no longer be rendered that bill on paper. It's all electronic. That saves us money. It helps the environment because we're not going through paper as quickly as we used to. And so with some of the proceeds that we save from doing that, the administrative time of rendering that paper bill, we're able to take that money and install solar charging stations all around town where you can walk up and free of charge. It's all from the power of the sun. You plug in your mobile phone, really anything that you can plug in, your laptop, whatever, and you can recharge. So keep your eye out for those. And you're going to see this is a trend here. Paperless billing, that's something that LES has done from our culture of sustainability, but it's something that's customer facing. So you, the customer, can participate that in as well. And you're going to see that all the way through. The next is net metering, where you actually install solar. Typically solar, could be any renewable, but usually most people do solar in this part of the country, up to 25 kW on the roof of your home or your business. And you actually use that to supply your own electricity needs. But when you have excess, you export that and sell it to LES. LES has some really lucrative incentives on this. One is on the energy payment side. So when you export to LES, we pay much more than our typical avoided cost, what it really costs us to produce that energy. It's actually half of the retail rate. In addition, we'll make a one-time capacity payment when that system goes commercial. We'll pay you $375 for every kW that faces to the south, $475 for every kW that faces to the west. Why do we pay more if it faces to the west? Well, because we peak that 1 hour that we have to build the system for, even though it only happens 1 hour a year, that happens late afternoon, early evening, typically in July or August. And if you face your solar panels to the south, you'll get more energy over the course of the year, but you'll get less during that peak hour. You face them to the west, you guessed it, they're putting out closer to their maximum at the time of our peak hour, helping us out, so we pay a little bit more for that. Then you've got our renewable generation rate. That's for customers that want to pursue their own solar, but on a little bigger scale, from 25 to 100 kW. And it's got all the same incentives, both on the energy payment side and on the capacity payment side, that upfront payment, as net metering. Well, with renewable generation rate, you're not offsetting your load. LES just promises to buy everything you produce. The neat thing about the renewable generation rate, it's set up so you can have a partnership amongst different ratepayers, different customers at LES. So you can partner with some of your neighbors. Some folks at Capitol Beach did this, put in a solar project. That's actually the picture right there of the installation at Capitol Beach. And then LES is buying all that energy you produce. And then finally, you have our community solar project, the first utility scale solar project that went in the state of Nebraska. Actually, we've got a zoom in here so you get a little better view of that for those of you who haven't seen it. I can tell you up in the upper right up there, that's Interstate 80. And what looks like little ants right there, those are cars. The bigger ants are semis. So that gives you an idea of the scale of this installation. It's about 5 megawatts DC, 4 megawatts AC, went in 2016. We are very proud of two things. Number one, that like I said, it was the first utility scale or large scale solar project in the state of Nebraska. And number two, it is far from the only one now. We kind of help people along by breaking that initial bubble. Some people were able to see it, and now a lot of folks have put in facilities like this. Many of them are quite a bit larger. So really proud of that we were able to start that trend. Now there's two customer-facing programs along with this one. One is SunShares. So with LES SunShares, you can make a voluntary contribution to support the project. It's for as little as $3 per month, and any dollar increment above that. You can start at any time, you can stop at any time. The one that gives you a little more vested interest is virtual net metering. With virtual net metering, you actually purchase the rights to a panel at this facility. You can actually go as small as a half panel. You can either make an upfront payment or you can make payments over a 3-year period. And in exchange for that payment or those payments, you get the rights to that panel. So on your bill each month, what you see is here's how much energy you consume from LES. Here's how much energy your virtual panel or panels produced. And you actually pay your bill based on the net amount. It's just like with net metering. Our magic billing system makes it look like those panels actually sit on the roof of your home or your business. So a couple of neat ways for you to get involved with solar at LES, even if you don't own your own roof or your roof doesn't point in the right direction. Okay, so we're on to our next question. This gets into the energy efficiency side of things. So we want to know, in what year did LES become the very first utility in the country to offer building energy audits as part of the National Energy Conservation Policy Act? And that was actually a subset of the National Energy Act that came out in one of those decades. I won't tell you when, you can think about it. So is it 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000? If you know when the National Energy Act came out, you have a good idea of what that year is. Let's see what you think.
Just a couple more coming in here, Scott.
That's good. It shows they're thinking about it.
Yeah. All right, I'm cutting you guys off. Here you go.
All right, so we got most of the votes for 1980, followed by 1970. Few for 1990. All right, and the answer to this one is 1980. So good job, guys. You got the right answer. How do we know we were the first one? Because that was confirmed by both the American Public Power Association and the U.S. Department of Energy. So kind of a neat thing there. So we've been in energy efficiency for a long time, and what does that translate to? Well, the main thing is we use that expertise to go and give birth to our sustainable energy program, or as we like to call it, the SEP. Now that's a program, again, customer facing, allows customers to get different rebates so they can put in higher efficiency equipment than maybe they would have done on their own. So maybe you're putting in a better air conditioner or heat pump than you would have. Maybe you're putting in a better water heater. Maybe you're putting in better insulation, all those things that you can work through your contractor or installing vendor to kind of incentivize you to put in better equipment, lower the need for LES to serve that energy. And how does that end up playing a role in our decarbonization goal? Well, If that's energy we don't have to serve, that means it's generation we don't have to procure. And if it's generation we don't have to procure, a lot of times that means it's CO2 emissions we don't have to worry about. So SEP, since 2009, the SEP has offset the average energy use of over 13,000 average homes. And that's kind of a cumulative effect. So right now today, everything we've done with the SEP since 2009 is making our load in Lincoln lower by about the tune of 13,000 average Lincoln homes. That's kind of crazy when you think about it. Now, we also have things that go right to that peak hour and trying to trim that down. A great example is our Peak Rewards program. Now, that's where customers have their own Wi-Fi enabled smart thermostat that they use to control their air conditioning. And when they sign up for this program, LES pays them an incentive each year to be able to go in and on a few days during the summer, when we think we're going to hit that peak hour, we can adjust their thermostat set point earlier in the afternoon, maybe 1 or 2 o'clock, and we turn it down a few degrees and pre-cool their house or their business. And the idea is that later in the afternoon, maybe about 4 o'clock, when we think we're approaching that peak hour, we can go ahead and set that thermostat set point back to what it used to be. The idea is the customer pre-cooled their home, so hopefully they ride through the event and have the same amount of comfort they always would have if they wouldn't have changed their set point thermostat. But for us, we get to have your air conditioner off during the peak, lowers our peak demand, lowers our requirements for generation, and importantly to the goal, probably lowers their associated CO2 emissions. So we think energy efficiency is going to be a big part of this going forward, and those are all customer-facing programs, so you folks can play a role in that. Okay, next polling questions. Electric vehicles. In what year do you think LES first started testing 100% electric vehicles on the streets of Lincoln? And that is the vehicle right there. So if you know your old vehicles, you can get kind of dialed in on what year we're talking about here.
I'll give it just another couple of seconds here. All right, here come the results.
Okay, so most everybody's on 1980, followed by 1990, 2000. We actually had 3 people in 2010. All right. So the answer is 1980. This one is always crazy to me. When you think about that many decades ago, LES was first testing 100% all-electric vehicles. It's taken a while for the wave to kind of come, but boy, it sure seems like we're on the cusp of it where we're going to start seeing a lot more of these going forward. And so that brings us to some new parts of our programs. Now, one is internal, just what LES's use is of all-electric vehicles and hybrid electric vehicles. Well, if you look at LES's passenger fleet, right now, 76%, or just over 3/4 of our passenger fleet, is either a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, or an all-electric vehicle. And you're looking there, that picture, that's one of our new Chevy Bolts that's 100% electric. But this also has a customer-facing component. And the reason is we expect more and more of our customers to be adding these vehicles. So we want to get a feel for what they're going to do to that system load, and more importantly, that system peak that's going to drive all of our generation needs. So in 2019 and 2020, we ran an electric vehicle study. We had partners like the American Public Power Association, the Nebraska Environmental Trust, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and also the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL, was in on this. And what we did is we partnered with about 100 of our customers to install little plug-in modules. You can see it right there in the inset. It goes in your diagnostic port on your vehicle. Almost every vehicle has one. It's where you, when you go to your maintenance person, they plug in to see what's wrong with your car. And what that records for us is when they charge that vehicle, how much energy they consume when they charge it. It's actually GPS enabled. We actually record where they charge it, so we know if they charge at home or if they charge at a public station. Now, we also know when they drive the vehicle, how many miles they put on it, how much energy they consume. We do not know where they charge it because the GPS, it's only enabled when they actually plug it in to charge. We collected all that data over a 2-year period. We actually did a webinar on that last year as part of our Sustainable Living Week. Well, that's been great. We're learning a lot about what that load might mean to LES's system. But we decided to extend it this year in 2021. And one of the big things we did is even more important. We included what we call a demand response pilot. What that means is we took our Peak Reward Smart Thermostat program and rolled these electric vehicles under that umbrella. So now not only when we hit peak days in the summer and also the winter, we're not only turning off air conditioners in the summer, we're asking people with electric vehicles, hey, we think we're going to peak today for the winter, or hey, we think we're going to peak this afternoon in the summer. Could you please not charge your vehicle? So that's been a really good program for us. It looks like it's going to pay good dividends. And what you're looking for is, if this works, how could we expand that going forward? Because if we could take those electric vehicle charging needs off the system at the time of the peak hour, hey, that's a lot of new load that we won't see as far as generation requirements, which is not a lot of new load we don't have to worry about when we're looking at measuring our CO2 emissions and trying to reduce those. Okay, this is the last polling question. So we're going to look at wind now. So in what year did LES install 2 of Nebraska's first wind turbines? And I will give you a hint. Right now, they are the 2 oldest wind turbines in the state of Nebraska. So 78 and 79, 88 and 89, 98 and 99, or 2008 and 2009. I would tell you, we usually get our highest success rate on this question. Most people seem dialed in on this one. I don't want to put pressure on you, but usually people get this one right more than the others.
Give you guys just a couple of more seconds here. Make those final guesses, educated guesses. All right.
Educated guesses.
Here come the results.
Okay, so 98 and 99, the leaders, followed by 88 and 89, 78, 79, and then we got a few again, 2008, 2009. And the answer on this one, 98 and 99. So good job. The 2 oldest wind turbines in the state of Nebraska at this point. And so what have those led us to? Really big things. And so when you look at our wind portfolio today, it's pretty evenly split across 3 states. We've got 100 megawatts in Kansas, 100 megawatts in Oklahoma, and then 104 megawatts in aggregate over a number of projects in Nebraska, including those 2 original wind turbines. That is a huge penetration of wind given our size. If you look at LES, our peak load is a little under 800 megawatts. So to have over 300 megawatts of wind, that puts us in really rarefied air across the country. There aren't too many utilities that have a wind portfolio that's that large relative to the size of their load. This also has a customer-facing component because, bolstered mostly by the wind, you're able to purchase renewable energy certificates. Renewable energy certificates, or RECs, are a government-recognized function. It's basically the way to track renewable energy. So when you hear about people like Walmart's, Google's, Amazon's, those kind of folks that say, hey, we're going to be trying to serve by 100% or some percentage of renewable energy, the way they can officially prove that is by holding the RECs. 1 REC is generated for every megawatt hour that comes from, we'll say, a clean power source like wind or solar. Well, we produce a lot of wind, we produce a lot of RECs from that. And as that, a customer can leverage that, sign up for our program, so that automatically on your bill each month, we'll assign the number of RECs required to cover your consumption. So at the end of the year, you can officially claim that your energy was 100% renewable. The price goes up and down every year because RECs are traded on an open market. They're kind of a commodity, so the price floats. But I believe if you sign up in this calendar year, if you were on for the whole year, for an average Lincoln home, costs you less than $10 to be 100% renewable. The other cool thing is if you have traditional net metering, where you actually install solar on the roof of your home or your business, or you have virtual net metering through the community solar project, the billing system will automatically account for that and only bill you for enough RECs to cover your electricity needs above and beyond what you already served on your own with either net metering or virtual net metering. So a really neat, cheap, and easy way for customers to get involved and be 100% renewable if they would like to. Okay, so where have all these things kind of brought us then? Well, this is what our portfolio looked like in 2010. You can see we had coal across 3 states, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Iowa. We had the first wind project here in Lincoln. We had a small wind project up in northeast Nebraska. We had our hydroelectric contract from the Western Area Power Administration, a series of dams owned by the federal government. And then we had 3 local natural gas projects. Well, if you took all that on a nameplate basis, a nameplate means you measure all those resources by what they're capable of producing at their full maximum output. What you saw was an even split between natural gas and coal, and really for 2010, a pretty healthy dose of renewables. Our portfolio on a nameplate basis was about 8% renewable at that time. Now, if you took those renewables, which was mostly hydro followed by the wind, and you compared it to our retail sales, that's the total energy consumed by everybody that gets a bill that says LES across the top of it. Well, those renewables produce the equivalent of 9% of our total retail sales. Again, a really big number for 2010. So fast forward now to where we're at today. What's changed with our resource mix? Well, we were able to exit one of the coal contracts. So we went from 4 resources down to 3. We already talked about, we added an extensive amount of wind, and you can see the change there. We also added our local landfill gas project, where we take methane that's produced naturally from the Lincoln landfill. We partnered with the city of Lincoln on this, and we use that methane to produce electricity all year round. Makes about 5 megawatts all year round. And then we also have that 5 megawatt utility scale solar project. So a lot of big changes in only 10 years. If you look at what that did to our nameplate resource mix, remember, well, that's what the resources can produce at their full output. Well, now we're an even split between natural gas and renewables. They're about 35% each. Coal's about 30%. If you look at those renewables, in 2020, the last full year we had to look at, they produced the equivalent of 49% of our total retail sales. That's a really big number in the industry. So a lot of changes over a 10-year period. But remember, what we're really focused on now is that decarbonization goal. So let's look at how that comes out. This is a chart of our carbon intensity. And what that really is, it's your CO2 emissions rate. So what you're saying is, how many tons of CO2 do you produce from your entire generation portfolio for every megawatt hour of energy you produce? And you can see there, the orange trend, it's definitely coming down. What we've got is different milestones on the chart of when we did different things. You can see when we've added wind throughout the years, when we added the landfill gas, we added the solar, when we joined the Southwest Power Pool, the electricity market we participate in, and finally when we exited the coal resource. If you look at that, that's the carbon intensity. Again, that rate at which we produce CO2. That's dropped 45% from 2010 to 2020. But what really matters to us is our true CO2 emissions period, because that's what we've got to drive to zero if we're looking for our net zero goal, right? Well, from 2010 to 2020, we've reduced our CO2 emissions by 53%. You know, I told you before that our decarbonization goal is one of the most aggressive goals in the country, puts us in a small group. This CO2 reduction of over half from 2010 to 2020 puts us in an even smaller group of utilities that have been able to pull that off. Now, when I show this to folks, they say, well, gosh, we're doing great on that goal. I mean, we're got to be well ahead of the pace. We're already over halfway there. And that is true. But when you trend it out, if we look at what that CO2 emissions rate has to do, if you just made it a straight line, and look, this isn't going to be a straight line. There's going to be timing to all these decisions. You're going to have some years where not much happens. You're going to have some years where a lot of things happen. But if you just make it a straight line trend, that's what we have to do from 2010 to 2040. And when you look at it that way, we're definitely ahead of where we need to be, but not by a bunch. We've kind of got a heavy lift in front of us. And so when you look at that, that's where these future considerations come in, because this is going to be difficult to take us from 2020 to that end in 2040. Part of the reason is we've already done some of the easier things, some of the less risky things, some of the more cost-effective things in the first 10 years. So you can't all go and do those again. You're going to have to come up with some new options going forward. So the last thing we're going to go through today is some examples of those future considerations, and they're just examples. Nobody knows all the different things we're going to have to consider as we go forward. There's going to be problems that we haven't even dreamed up yet. There's going to be opportunities we haven't dreamed up yet. But here's definitely some examples of things that we're going to have to keep our eye on and contend with as we move forward. So the first is, I mentioned, we're a member of the Southwest Power Pool electricity market. And you can see there we've got a little inset for those of you that don't know what their footprint looks like. It's a competitive power pool electricity market. It runs from northern Texas up to the Canadian border, and it's up roughly the width of Nebraska all the way up. So the Southwest Power Pool, as you can imagine, they have all kinds of rules, but they have one rule that really stands above them all when it comes to generation. What they say is you have to have enough accredited capacity, with the key word there being accredited. That means capacity that you can count on being there during that peak hour. So you have to have enough accredited capacity to meet your peak load plus an extra 12%. They call that a reserve margin or like a safety factor. The idea is everybody has an extra 12%. So when some people have problems with their generators, there's enough to pick up the slack across the entire region. Well, so why is that difficult? Well, when you look at that goal, unfortunately, a lot of the resources that best align with our decarbonization goal don't work so well from an accredited capacity standpoint. And what are some good examples of that? Well, non-dispatchable resources like wind and solar, they're great examples of it. With wind and solar, the Southwest Power Pool, they only give you partial credit for those as far as accredited capacity. So if you put in 100 megawatts of wind, you might only get to count 15, 20, maybe 25 megawatts of that as accredited capacity. If you put in 100 megawatts of solar, today you might be able to count 75, maybe 80 megawatts of that. So that's really good. The problem is the way the math works, the more that's added to the Southwest Power Pool of a certain resource type, wind or solar, well, the amount that you can accredit goes down over time. That's just kind of the way the math works. And the reason for that is the more wind you add, hey, if you add any kind of generation to the SPP footprint, the more generation you add, the more reliable the system because you have more tools in your toolbox. But if you add a bunch of the same kind of thing, especially when it's non-dispatchable, so you can't control when it turns on or when it turns off or where it's running at, well, then the bang for the buck goes down because it all tends to kind of run at the same time. That's what we see with wind. The more wind you add, it's better than not having it, but the amount you can accredit, that percentage of the nameplate, that goes down over time because you're really ending up with more wind at the same time, maybe not when you actually need it at the time of your peak. Same thing with solar, and this one's easier to visualize because if you add solar, it's pretty much all running at the same time of day, right? About 8, 9 in the morning to winding off around 6 o'clock at night. And so if you have peaks that happen a little bit earlier, a little bit after, it doesn't help out so much. So that's one of the problems when you're looking at things like wind and solar. They only get to count a percentage of their resource size towards that accredited capacity requirement, and whatever they do get to count, it's going to go down as you go forward in the future as more of those resources are added to the SPP footprint. So that's one of the difficult things that we have to work through. People then say, well, you know what we need energy storage, because if you had energy storage, you could couple that with the wind and solar and make them closer to dispatchable, basically make it so you could use the energy when you want it, and that is 100% true. The catch is energy storage, when you put in batteries, the Southwest Power Pool measures accredited capacity in the same way. So right now, if you put in a battery system, you might get accounted for about 100% of its maximum rating because there's not very many batteries in the SPP footprint. But if you fast forward the next 10, 15 years, when we're probably likely to have a lot of batteries, well, the amount you can accredit from those is going to drop as well, just like wind and solar. Probably not as steeply, but it's going to drop. So even batteries have the same consideration you look at. Another one is the changes that we've got coming to our generation mix. And you know what? This has a lot of it nothing to do with the goal. This is something we've been tracking for a number of years. If you look at 2040, it just so happens that almost all of our resource mix is either going to have, if it's under contract, the contract will expire by 2040, or if it's something we actually own, by 2040, it's either real near or actually beyond its originally expected lifetime. Now, you don't want to get too hung up on that because sometimes it's easy to build a plant and say that plant will be here for 40 years. But then when you get to 40 years, you say, hey, the plant's doing well. It can go a number of years longer. But at some point, everything has to time out, right? Father Time always wins in the end. So that's one of the things we're watching. Even without the goal, we have to replace the bulk of our resource mix by 2040. Now, when you throw the goal on top of it, it makes that mountain a little higher to climb because some of the things that wouldn't be so old that we wouldn't have to change out, well, they produce CO2 emissions. So now we have to change those out because of the goal. But why are we watching that? Well, if you total all that up, we've got to replace roughly about 1,200 megawatts of generation, 1,200 megawatts of nameplate generation. A rule of thumb for what's a megawatt of generation cost? Well, you usually use a natural gas combustion turbine plant where you take natural gas in, electricity comes out. That's kind of the rule of thumb in the industry for getting an idea of dollars. And what that is $1 million per megawatt. So if you look at 1,200 megawatts, $1 million per megawatt, that's $1.2 billion worth of generation that we've got to probably replace in the next 2 decades. Most of that just because of age, but a little bit of it because of the goal. And so that's another thing that we've got to keep in the back of our mind. We're poised to have to spend some money to rebuild our generation mix. And that's going to require really good timing because you want to try and hit those opportunities at the right time to minimize the related costs. There's going to be a cost, but you want to minimize that related cost. And then finally, this is the big one. We talked about this in the very beginning, that race with technology. You simply don't have the tools to practically meet this goal today. So what does that mean? You need technology to come along on the white horse and give you some new options to make it easier. And that's going to be a race because you don't know when those are going to come along relative to the timeline on your goal. I'll give you some examples. We talked about some of these already. Energy storage. Energy storage, great tool. But what are you talking about today? Battery-based systems that might last a number of hours, maybe up to 8 hours, not much more than that. Well, that's really good. It's better than nothing. But to really make a big difference with energy storage and really leverage things like wind and solar, you need storage that lasts for days, even weeks. Even better would be months. If you can get there, now you've made this a lot more practical and probably a lot more cost-effective and reliable. The problem is that technology doesn't exist today. Now, maybe it will in the next 20 years, but maybe it won't. And even if it does, when's it going to come along? That's a difficult thing to know. Another one we've already talked about today, carbon capture and sequestration. That's a great one. Hey, if we could capture the CO2 emissions and put them somewhere so they never make it to the atmosphere, that's really good. Problem is, even though there's people experimenting with that today, you can't truly put one of those systems in. You just can't do it. It's not commercially available. Maybe it will be in the next 20 years. Maybe it won't. Now, people look at a lot of times nuclear. That's another great option. No CO2 emissions. It's dispatchable. That's close in a lot of ways to the perfect resource. The problem is LES is a rather small utility. We can't do a large nuclear plant on our own. We're just not big enough. Too much risk. We don't have that much need for that kind of generation because they're always built pretty big to capture economies of scale and make them somewhat cost effective. But there's a new technology out there people are working on called small modular nuclear reactors. Now, these are smaller systems, should be more efficient to put in. They're tailor-made for utility the size of LES. But guess what? You can't commercially buy those either. Maybe over the next 2 decades you will, maybe you won't. And the last one, energy efficiency. We talk about that. If we can keep our peak demand down, hey, that's generation that we don't have to serve the load. That's generation we don't have to meet that SPP requirement of having enough to meet our peak load plus 12%, which means if it has CO2 associated with it, that CO2 emissions we don't have to worry about. That's a great deal. The catch there, you can't get rid of your entire load with energy efficiency. It just doesn't work that way. So there's a limit to how much you can lower that peak load. What is that? We're not sure. We're going to work on trying to find that. And you've also got to be careful. You've got to do it in a cost-effective manner. A lot of times it's cheaper to do energy efficiency projects than to put in generation, but not all the time. Everything has its price. And at some point, you're better off putting in generation resources as opposed to tracking down energy efficiency. It all depends on how much you have to spend to either defer a megawatt or produce a megawatt. So all those things are sitting there that we've got to juggle going forward as we try to work on being net zero from our generation portfolio by 2040. And when we get to technology, the last piece I'm going to leave you with is this. It's a joint effort by the Electric Power Resource Institute and the Gas Technology Institute. And they're launching what they've called the Low Carbon Resources Initiative. And what they're looking to do is to accelerate the development and, even more important, the demonstration of low to zero carbon energy technologies. These are the things we need to meet goals like LES's. And because of that, LES signed on as an anchor sponsor of this initiative in August of 2020. We signed up for this even before we knew we were going to have a goal or not from the administrative board. The goal wasn't set until November 2020, but we thought it's that important. We wanted to be on the ground floor of this. If you look at that list there, you can see all the different emblems from the different companies that are signed up as sponsors now. You'll see LES in there, but you should also take pride if you're a Nebraskan, because what you'll also notice is that since that time, Nebraska Public Power District and the Omaha Public Power District have both signed up. In fact, all of Nebraska's retail customers, I believe, are represented by their utility being on this list. So that's kind of a neat thing. When you look at LES, we pledged to contribute about $550,000, so a little over $500,000 through the first 6 years of the initiative. So this is one of the things that we're using to try to make sure we can go out and make the technologies available that we need to achieve this goal. LES on our own, we're just not big enough to do research and development, but as a member of this group, we can make things happen. It gives us a big voice with some of the major players in the industry, if you look around, and we can try to push things in the right direction to make sure we can make this goal a reality that's also reliable and cost-effective for our customers. That's the last thing I have for you. So now we're going to open it up, Kyle, and take any questions that people have.
All right. Let's see here. Sorry, it took a moment to unmute. So it looks like, first of all, Marilyn has raised her hand. Marilyn, I will pull you up here and ask your question. Marilyn, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Hey. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Marilyn.
Do you want to read what's there or shall I just say it?
You can just go for it.
Okay. Well, this morning I got an email from an energy observant friend in Western Nebraska who said, what about compressed air for storage instead of batteries? I have no idea what the answer to that question is. And I thought Scott would be a great time to ask that question.
Awesome.
Yeah, compressed air is really an interesting technology. If you can get it in the right area, it can be a really big deal. So what they're doing with compressed air is you find naturally occurring domes under the ground usually, because it's not cost effective or space effective to build them above ground. So you're looking for natural occurring domes or holes under the ground where you can put in compressed air and store it there. And so what you do, it's an energy storage. You say, hey, when electricity is cheap, or maybe there's a lot of excess wind and solar, I'm going to use electricity to compress air and shove it underground so that later when I need that electricity, or the electricity is higher priced, maybe the wind and solar isn't blowing, I can extract that compressed air and then use it to create electricity back. Great idea. The problem is there's only so many places around the country where you can actually do this, because there's only so many of those naturally occurring domes that have the right geology to actually hold that air and not let it escape. So that's one of the things you're always looking for. It's just not something that you can do probably on a large scale all over the place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marilyn. All right. We've got another question in the queue here from David. David asks, what is the environmental impact of all the old batteries from electric cars? And before you answer that one, I'll say, anyone with more questions, please feel free to fire them in here.
So good question. You know, I will tell you, we don't really know the answer yet. There's a lot of people talking about recycling those batteries. There are people talking about maybe taking batteries that are used in electric vehicles, and then when they've reached their end of life from a vehicle standpoint, so maybe we'll say 10 years, rolling them into other uses that aren't quite as intensive as a battery for a car. Maybe you're not quite worried about being stuck on the highway, kind of high risk if your battery runs out, but other things you could use them for that when they run out, it's fine. So different things to do there, either recycling or keep using them longer. The reason you don't really know, though, is because we haven't really got there. When you look at this current technology of battery, they haven't been around for that long, and definitely not in huge numbers. So that's one of the things you're going to have to watch going forward. I mean, I think you're seeing some of the similar things now. It's analogous to recycling wind turbine blades. It was easy when wind turbines started going in saying, hey, we'll recycle the blades, and that probably makes sense. But nobody really knew how many wind turbines we'd have when they started reaching their end of life. And recycling, I think you're seeing in some areas of the country, is becoming a little more problematic than they thought it might be. Doesn't mean they're not going to get it done. Doesn't mean that it's just growing pains that they have to work through. But it's hard to foresee how difficult it's going to be. So with car batteries, they've got some ideas right now. What you don't know is how effective are those ideas going to be in maybe 10 years, because you don't know how many batteries you're going to be dealing with.
All right, thank you, David. All right, we've got another one in here that, let me take a look here. So do you ever see a time when coal could be used again in a clean manner, such as gasification?
Absolutely. That's one of the things that low carbon resource initiative is looking at, is ways that coal and other fossil fuels like natural gas could still be an option, but in a way that controls their CO2 emissions. So when you're looking at coal, one of the big things they're looking at is, regardless of what you do on the front end with the fuel, trying to capture the related CO2 emissions, whether that's going in as a solid coal or going in as a gasified coal, looking at trying to capture those CO2 emissions. On the natural gas side, there's a lot of that low carbon resources initiative is going into trying to run things that typically run on natural gas on an alternative that doesn't have associated CO2 emissions. They're looking at things like using hydrogen. They're looking at using things like ammonia. They're also looking at things that they call CO2 or carbon neutral fuels. Now, these are fuels that when you burn them, they still produce CO2. But when you create them, you're doing it and essentially pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. So if you pull the CO2 out of the atmosphere and then you burn the fuel and put it back, you've ended up carbon neutral because you didn't create any new carbon. So a lot of different options in those areas. Unfortunately, you don't know how many or which ones are actually going to come to fruition, and if they're going to come to fruition fast enough for us to take advantage of them. But those are one of the things we're hoping for, because if you can do any of those things, either basically decarbon coal generation or natural gas-based generation, well, that would be huge, because now you've got those dispatchable resources that you can turn on and turn off at your own pleasure, not so much like wind and solar, where Mother Nature is the one with the keys. So good question.
All right, thank you. A quick side question to that, Scott. This one's from me. What is, I can assume what gasification is. How do you gasify coal?
So for starters, Kyle, you're killing me because you're supposed to be on my team and you're asking me questions. And so it's a process they go through. This is a lecture all in of itself, but it's a process they go through where you're taking the coal and you're actually turning it into a gasified form. So you're burning gas through your facilities. It ends up having a resource that looks a lot like a natural gas resource, but it wasn't a natural gas that created in the first place. It was hard coal that they gasified.
Cool. So we've got another question here from Brooke. Brooke asks, what is your biggest challenge in hitting the decarb goal?
You know, I think we talked through all this. It's not just one thing, but when you lump it all together, it's saying, look, we've got to do this and maintain high system reliability, and we've got to maintain low cost. Those are things in both counts that our customers depend on every day, right? So we've got to do that. And oh, by the way, while you're maintaining high system reliability and low system cost, well, you've got to fulfill all your requirements in the Southwest Power Pool and do all that while decarbonizing your generation portfolio. That's the tough part there. You can't say, well, we're going to decarbonize, and so we're no longer going to worry about things like reliability and cost and meeting our SPP requirements, because all those things are required. They're part of what goes into being a prudent and good utility like LES. So that's the difficult thing, is you don't get you already had things that were difficult in their own right, and now you've added to it the decarbonization component. You didn't get rid of any of your other requirements, you just kind of added a new one. So that's the difficult part. It just kind of added to the difficulty. But you know what? That's what we're working on. That's what we're here for.
Cool. We've got just a few more minutes here that we've got allotted for our presentation today. It looks at the moment like we don't have any questions in the queue. So if anybody's got any burning questions, feel free to throw them in. If anyone's feeling brave like Marilyn, feel free to raise your hand. That icon again is down at the bottom of your screen. And we'll give you guys just another moment here. So, oh, someone jumped in right away. Cool. Ken asks, excuse me, one moment. Oh, well, that's nice. Thank you, Ken. So Ken just wanted to point out that LES has maintained low costs for customers and high reliability while decreasing CO2 emissions by 53% in the last 10 years. So he seems pretty confident we'll be able to reach this goal.
Thank you, Kent. We're very proud of what you pointed out there. The difficult thing you have is that, like most things in life, right, the closer you get to the summit, the harder it's going to be. So we know that the next 50% probably going to be more difficult than the last 50%. And the closer you get towards 100, the tougher the decisions are going to be. Now, what can change that? We talked about it. Technology could change that, right? If doing the last 50%, we have options that weren't available to us in the first 50%, that could change things. But knowing what we know today, we expect this goal to get more difficult as you move forward. That's just kind of the way it is. But thanks, Kent.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. That was nice. If anybody else has any other compliments they want to throw our way real quick, we'll take those too. Otherwise, oh, one more question. We'll call this the last one. So, does LES have any projections on what this goal might possibly do to rates in the future?
No, and that's the tough thing. You can't really tell for sure what it's going to do because you don't know, again, what's all going to change between now and then. There could be technologies available in the next 20 years that we can't even dream of today that we don't know our options. That could change everything. You could have regulations come out like we'll say a carbon tax. If a carbon tax comes, that's going to change the economics of our entire generating fleet. And so if you change your generating fleet, you could actually end up saving money compared to some of your previous options. You don't know for sure when things are going to have to retire. We talked about that. We have different things going by the wayside. This is just one of those things that you just really can't say what it's going to cost because you can't map out exactly how you're going to get there over the next 20 years. You know, our goal in the near term with this is to do the same thing we've been doing over the last 10 years, the things that led to that 53% CO2 emissions reduction already, while, as pointed out, maintaining some of the lowest rates in the country and some of the highest system reliability. What we're going to do is try to look for the right opportunity at the right time to decarbonize our generation fleet while at the same time making it better from a cost-effective standpoint and from a reliability standpoint. That's what we're going to try and do every day. Now, you're not always going to be able to hit all those with every decision, but that's what you're yearning for.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we're going to call that was the last question. I guess no more compliments coming in, so I'll say, Scott, I think you did a very good job today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kyle, and thanks everybody for attending. It was fun.
All right. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.